The Boy from Yesterday, Chapter 2, Too Many Noises. No matter how many times it came, the morning alarm on her iPhone that sounded like a marimba was a startling noise that Laurel Humphrey could never get used to. She had tried different ringtones, from the marimba to the old-fashioned car horn to the motorcycle rev, but there was no sound she could program the alarm to use that didn't jolt her awake from her prized sleep, and her strange dream that she was outside in a nightgown, hearing her name called by someone out there in the dark. She reached over from her wide bed with the big down comforter and felt the top of the bedside table until she found her phone with her eyes half closed and tapped the button on it to snooze it just for a few more cherished moments before starting what she knew would be a long day of class. She was a freshman in her second semester at Chesterfield University, and today included the science class with Professor Kapoor, who had that accent that wasn't quite Indian and not quite anything else recognizable. 5 minutes of extra sleep, she thought, and it was spent trying to make sense of the noise Professor Kapoor's melodic accent made in her head. She had resigned herself to the inevitability of waking up when another buzz from her phone sounded, and she knew instinctively what it was. This time it was her best friend, Emily Lemmon, a fellow freshman, texting her about who knows what. In the upstairs bedroom of her grandmother Marguerite's refurbished farmhouse, Laurel sleepily sat up in bed, swung her legs to the side, and put her feet on the smooth, cool hardwood floor. Those floors were part of the charm of the historic Victorian farmhouse, which Laurel loved almost as much as Marguerite, who had led a refurbishing several times over the years. This was the house Marguerite grew up in, and it had been remodeled several times just in her lifetime as styles and needs changed. It was built before anyone in town could remember, and it was just always there on a beautiful flat parcel of land that overlooked the hills from the upstairs bedrooms. It was full of country charm, and many of the built-in shelves and ornamentations of some of the doorways, ceilings, light fixtures, and the living room fireplace were all original. It was the perfect house for a family to call home, and Laurel felt safe here, as well as delighted to get away from the city where she had grown up and revel in the house's antique charm. But it also had every convenience, which Laurel loved. Marguerite had added lots of electrical outlets, which helped Laurel when she had to plug in her TV or DVR, an iPhone and makeup mirror and desk lamp and power strip for her PC, printer, scanner, and stereo speakers. Getting all set up and settled in, decorating every last inch of the room, had given her something to do when she was moving in last fall, to take her mind off the months before her mom had been sick. She lazily reached over to get her iPhone screen and remove it from the recharging cradle. Yes, indeed, it was a text from Emily. "Get up, girl, I want to know everything," in all caps. Emily wanted to know how Laurel's date last night was with Christian Tuckerby. Laurel texting back, "Patience, my BFF, is a virtue. She's returning to the world of the living. BRB." Laurel liked to refer to herself in the third person when texting with Emily, as if the text would chronicle a narrative of her whole life if they were ever to be strung together. Third person seemed more interesting and gave her a bit of distance from actually coming to terms with the reality of life as a freshman at Chesterfield, especially on days when Professor Kapoor was involved. Or maybe she was just disillusioned with Christian, but that wasn't hard to do these days. She had been up late listening to his ambitious plans for this and that, which on the one hand were impressive, and on the other hand were keeping her up on a night which would be followed by a day that included a long lecture from Professor Kapoor and his mysterious accent. She realized that being with Christian could be frankly annoying, like when he seemed to prattle on with tales of his relentless ambition, which seemed to be talking at Laurel rather than to her. But he only did the grandiose chatter at certain times, which made Laurel wonder what was causing him to be so frenetic sometimes and so calm at others. The calm times were the ones that she loved. Christian was tall and unusually handsome for men in Chesterfield, with a chiseled chin, dark hair, and a sexy tuft of dark chest hair at his collar. He was one of those guys whose athleticism made him good at every sport he tried. He was popular with a whole group of other guys in his fraternity who were hoping that just being near him would somehow make his looks and popularity rub off on them. His strong arms had held Laurel on those nights just after Laurel's mom had passed away last fall, when she recently moved to Marguerite's house. Despite her loving being with Marguerite, she still felt lonely. Christian filled the void from almost the very beginning. His tight hugs, his dumb jokes, his big dreamer stories, all of this took her mind off of some of the worst months of her life. She found comfort looking into those big brown eyes of his, and his heavy whiskers made him rugged and sexy in a way most guys his age weren't. He came from one of those perfect families, too, not too far outside of Chesterfield, but still close to the city, wealthy, influential, and always seen at the right places. But Christian didn't talk much about his family, especially his parents, and when Laurel asked about them, he often changed the subject, usually with a dumb joke and a slight dilation of his eyes and blushing of his cheeks. Laurel knew that she hit a nerve by asking about his family, so she learned not to. He was so much of what she wanted, and yet she always held back a little from fully trusting him, made worse by not knowing why. But in a town as small as Chesterfield, strong, handsome guys were not plentiful, and she always had a good enough time with Christian, and that was good enough for her for now. She always felt good when he smiled at her. Thinking of that made Laurel lost in her own thoughts for a moment when she heard another noise. It was the microwave downstairs beeping, and Marguerite calling upstairs from the landing below. "Laurel, dear, oatmeal, bananas, or blueberries? I have both," she said, then paused. "I think." Laurel realized how hungry she was. "Blueberries! Be down soon, Gran," Laurel yelled back, which somehow seemed like a strenuous task at that hour of the morning. Laurel wondered how Marguerite could be so perky in the mornings, but she was. Marguerite was not like other grandmothers. She was more youthful, somehow, like an aging hippie left over from the 60s, which she was. She had long blonde hair that was often pulled back in a ponytail, and she had reading glasses that were she was always putting on and off her face, attached to a black nylon cord that she wore around her neck. She was always cooking or researching recipes or pursuing some hobby or another. She was not one of those widows whose life fell apart after her husband died. She had decided to honor his life by continuing with hers, content to stay in Chesterfield, where she and her husband had grown up and lived, and raised their daughter, Laurel's mother, Annette. Laurel's mother had died of breast cancer while Laurel was living with her parents in the city and going to a private high school. Her mom hadn't lived long enough to see Laurel graduate. After her death, Laurel's dad didn't want to stay in the city anymore and left on a research project to Egypt to write another book for his career in cultural anthropology. Laurel didn't want her father to go, but she knew they would be apart as long as she was going to college anyway, and she wanted him to be happy. So they made their peace and went their separate ways for now. Laurel went to Chesterfield to live with Marguerite, whom she had visited during breaks and summers in high school. She had always loved Chesterfield, mostly because she associated it with her grandparents, her loving and practical joking grandfather Frank, and her cool grandmother Marguerite. Plus, Chesterfield University was known for its pre-med program, which is what Laurel had wanted since biology class in the 9th grade, aptly taught by Mrs. Leaf. Laurel laughed out loud a moment, thinking of the irony of Ms. Leaf's names for a biology class, and realized her laugh was a lot like Marguerite's. The small town was nothing like the stress of the city, but for Laurel, that was perfectly okay these days. Laurel embarked on her morning routine of taking her shower, listening to her tunes from the docking station speakers her iPhone fit into on top of the toilet tank, dressing, a little blow-drying of her hair, some flat-ironing of it too, and sitting at her dressing table for a fast makeup routine that seemed to be redundant on her beautiful face, with the glowing brown eyes and the flowing chestnut-colored hair that flowed down around her narrow shoulders. She went back and sat on the bed and made a quick check of her emails on her phone, which were mostly spam except for one from TJ Jennings, her GBFF, gay best friend forever, about possibly studying for the first test and that was coming up next week, or as Professor Kapoor had aptly put it, dat test nes VPs. She couldn't do without TJ. He was a clever guy, who made great grades and seemed to understand all of the material from Kapoor, mysterious accent and all, and then explained it all in his own colorful language between descriptions of the various men from current TV shows that TJ had crushes on. It was an odd triangle. Emily felt that Laurel was her best friend, and TJ felt Emily was his, and the three of them together seemed to make an odd but complementary triumvirate. Deleting the spam and other junk from her phone's email inbox only took a few seconds before Laurel noticed the time on her phone and jumped up. She grabbed her purse and her backpack and ran down the stairs despite the relative height of her heels, and ate the wonderful oatmeal infused with the frozen blueberries that were from last summer's low crop. She even had a quicker chat with Marguerite, who was washing some cucumbers for canning pickles later, and going on about something that Agnes Murphy, the Chesterfield University librarian and lifelong nemesis to Marguerite, which Laurel never really understood, was up to now. Laurel gave Marguerite a quick kiss on the cheek and dashed outside, walking the short blocks into town at a quick pace, annoyed by the sounds of a truck backing up on the construction site across the street, a few car horns at the usual bad spots of the intersections of Main Street and Canterbury, and then again at Hill Street, and the whir of a few scooters of fellow students also heading to campus. But first, Laurel was heading down Main Street to the Rocket Diner, or church as she and her friends called it, to meet Emily for a quick morning coffee to discuss the state of affairs that had transpired since, well, they had done the same thing yesterday morning. Her phone buzzed again with Emily texting, "Where you? Church ASAP." Laurel texted back, "Look up now," and hit send just as she entered and sat down across from Emily at their regular booth inside the front door next to the windows, just as Emily looked up from her phone, smirked, and rolled her eyes. The speakers above their booth featured Lord, who explained, "And we'll never be royals," as the clatter of other college students urgently discussing their social lives, impending tests, or gripes about school at each table, and the clang of dishes being served or taken away filled the air. Laurel was about to debrief Emily on last night's date as their favorite waitress, Trixie, a perky blonde with swept-up hair and funky blue kitty cat-style glasses, poured them both fresh coffee. It was a bustling college hangout in a charming American town. It was April 14th, 2020, and all was right with the world.